Chapter 1. Christmas Eve. Toss, toss, from one side to the other. Still Kitty could not sleep. The big round moon looked in at the window, for the curtain had not been drawn, and it made a picture of the window on the wall opposite, and showed the pattern of the paper. Nosegays of roses tied with blue ribbon, roses and knots of blue ribbon, like no roses Kitty had ever seen, and no blue ribbon she had ever bought. Toss, toss, toss. She shut her eyes not to see the picture of the window on the wall or the roses and the blue ribbon. Yet she could not go to sleep. It was always toss, toss, from one side to the other. It was Christmas Eve, and outside the world was white with snow. It had been a dreadful day, Kitty said to herself. The last 9 days had been dreadful days, and this had been the dreadfulest of all. Her brother Johnny was very ill. He was 6 years old, just 2 years younger than herself, but he was much smaller, being a tiny cripple. Next to her mother, Kitty loved him more than anybody in the whole world. All through those dreadful 9 days she had not been allowed to see him. She had many times knelt outside his door and listened to his feeble moan, but she had not been permitted to enter his room. That morning she had asked the doctor if she could see Johnny, as it was Christmas Eve. The doctor had shaken his head and patted her hair. He must not be excited. He is still very ill. If he gets better after tonight, then perhaps, he said. She had overheard what he whispered to Nurse. Tonight will decide if he pulls through. Tonight. All day Kitty had thought of those words. Tonight, if he pulls through tonight. What did they mean? Did they mean that Johnny might die tonight? She had waited outside Johnny's room, but her mother had said, "No, you cannot go in," and Nurse had said, "You will make Johnny worse if you stand about, and he hears your step." Kitty's heart was full of misery. It was unkind not to be let in to see Johnny, she had said again and again to herself. She loved him so much. She loved him so much. Then there was a dreadful reason why his illness was worse for her to bear than for anyone else. Kitty remembered that 10 days ago there had been a snowstorm. When the snow had ceased, she had gone out and made snowballs in the garden, and she had asked her mother if Johnny might come out and make snowballs also. On no account, her mother had answered. Johnny is weak. If he caught a cold, it would be very bad for him. Kitty remembered how the next morning she had gone into the meadow leading out of the garden. There the gardener had helped her to make a snowman, and they had put a pipe in his mouth. She had danced around the snowman, and she had longed for Johnny to see it. Kitty remembered how she had run indoors and found Johnny sitting by the fire in his low crimson chair, his tiny crutch beside him, his paint box on a little table before him. He was painting a yellow sun, with brays all around it. It was Johnny's delight to paint. He would make stories about his pictures. He told those stories to Kitty only. They were secrets. He kept his pictures in an old tea chest which their mother had given him, and it had a lock and key. Johnny kept all his treasures there, all his little treasures, all his little secrets. They were so pretty and so pitiful. They were his tiny pleasures in life. Johnny was painting, good children land, and naughty children land. Good children land he painted in beautiful yellow gamboge. Naughty children land in black Indian ink. Kitty in her bed tonight seemed to see the whole scene and to hear her own and Johnny's voices talking. She had rushed in and Johnny had looked up and he had begun to tell her the story of his picture. "Look, Kitty," he had said, "this is the portrait of the naughtiest child, the very, very naughtiest that ever was. And he has come into good children land by mistake, you know. Look, he has furry legs like a goat, and horns and a tail, just because he is so naughty. But he is going to become good. I will paint him getting good in my next picture." Kitty remembered how she had just glanced at the picture. The naughtiest child that ever was looked rather like a big blot with a tail, standing in front of the yellow sun. But she had been so full of the thought of the snowman that she had begun to speak about him at once. "Oh, Johnny," she had said, skipping about first on one foot and then the other, "the gardener and I have made such a snowman. He is as big as the gardener and ever so much fatter, and he's got hands but no legs, only a stump, you know, and we've put a pipe in his mouth." At this description, Johnny's eye had sparkled, and he had cried, "Oh, I wish I could see him." Then she had gone on to say, still skipping about, "He has 2 holes for his eyes, and they seem to look at me, and his face is as round as a plate. He just looks like the man in the moon smoking a pipe." This description had roused Johnny's excitement, and he had stretched an eager little hand towards his crutch. "Please take me to see him, please take me to see him," he had entreated. Kitty remembered that she had hesitated. "I'm afraid it would give you a cold," she had said, looking at Johnny with her head to one side. "I shall put on my hat and comforter," Johnny had replied, grasping his crutch. Still, she remembered. She had hesitated. Her mother had said, Johnny must not go out in the snow. But then Kitty had thought, the sun is shining, and it will be for a moment only. She did so long for Johnny to see the snowman, and he wished it so much. She remembered, she had thought, it can do him no harm just for a moment. She had helped Johnny on with his overcoat and wrapped his comforter round him and put on his hat, and together they had gone out. There was no one in the hall or on the stairs, and they had gone out unobserved. Johnny had not a notion he was disobeying his mother. His tiny crutch danced merrily along with a muffled thud in the snow. He swung his small body as he hopped along, and he laughed as he looked around on the glistening white garden. So brisk and joyous was his laugh that Kitty had thought it was like the crow of a little cock. When Johnny saw the snowman, he shouted a feeble hurrah, and he laughed more and more merrily as Kitty danced around and pelted the snowman with snowballs. Kitty remembered how she had gone on dancing a while. Then all at once she noticed that Johnny looked pinched and blue. She had run up to him just in time to catch him as he was falling. His arm had lost its power, and his crutch had dropped. She had held him tight, but he looked so pale and thin that she thought he was going to die. Her screams had brought the gardener to the rescue, and Johnny had been carried indoors. That night, Johnny's illness had begun, and ever since the doctor had come twice a day, Kitty had never been able to tell anyone of the load that had been weighing on her heart during those 9 dreadful days. Once she had tried to say it to her mother, but she burst into such a fit of sobbing that the words refused to come. No one had reproached her for having taken Johnny out. No one had even mentioned it to her. But she knew it was she who had brought all this suffering on him. She who loved him so much. She who loved him so much. As she was thinking of all this, a voice sounded by her bedside. It said, "Now, Missy dear, you must not take on so. You must not fret. Look what old Cooksy has bought you, a mince pie, a big, beautiful mince pie, all for Missy alone." It was Cook who had stolen softly into the room. She was a fat, good-natured soul, and she spoiled Kitty terribly. All during that sad week, Cook had petted her, given her cakes and sweets. She had kept assuring Kitty she was the dearest, best little girl in the world. Cooksy's little angel darling, and that Johnny would soon get quite well. This sympathy had sometimes been very agreeable to Kitty, and she had accepted it with the sweet things it brought, gratefully. But at other times she had repelled it, feeling angry with Cook for saying what was not true, only to please her. Now Kitty buried her face deeper in the pillow, stopping her ears and waving away Cook and the mince pie with an impatient elbow. "Go away! Go away!" she cried. "You spoil me. Mamma says you spoil me. I would not be so naughty if you did not spoil me." Cook continued to hold out the mince pie, but Kitty would not look around. Go away, she repeated. Poor Cook departed, leaving the mince pie on a chair by Kitty's bed. As she reached the door, she looked around and murmured, "Poor little dear. She doesn't mean to be unkind to old Cooksy. Toss, toss, went Kitty again, as soon as she was left alone. She had never been so wakeful. It was as if some little creature was sitting on her pillow and talking to her. It was not a real voice, it was her memory that was wide awake. "You have teased Johnny," it said. "He is so helpless. And how often, when he has asked for his treasures, you have bought him rulers, books, all sorts of things he did not want. Did you see the gush of tears in his eyes when you continued to tease? And when you ceased, the grateful, forgiving little lips put up to kiss you?" As Kitty listened, she tossed about even more restlessly. Presently the voice that was her memory went on again. "There was that peach last summer. Your mother gave it to you to share with Johnny. You gave him the smaller half. You kept the bigger one for yourself." Kitty tried not to hear, but the voice went on speaking. "How often you have run out to amuse yourself and left him pining alone. Do you remember that day when the Punch and Judy man brought his show into the garden? How impatient you were. Tap, tap. His eager little crutch could scarcely follow you. You dropped his hand suddenly and he fell to the ground. What a piteous, helpless little heap he looked. He could not raise himself. But when you lifted him, he stroked your cheek and said, 'Never mind, Kitsy,' and he never told. Do you remember how pale he looked all day, as if he were in pain?" Kitty could not bear listening to that voice any longer, so she sat up in bed, and there on the wall opposite there seemed written in the moonlight what the doctor had said, "If he pulls through tonight." Did it mean that Johnny might die tonight? She must see Johnny. She must. She would be so gentle, So good. If he would only get well again, she would never tease him again. She would never be impatient. She would always be good to him. She would put aside all her money and buy toys for him to put into his treasure box. If they would only let her in, she would creep into his room, sit by his bedside, and hold his hand. She would tell him the story of the blue rose, which she had invented out of her own head, and which he liked so much. Kitty now went over the story herself. There was a garden to which a fairy with blue wings and a blue hat had told her the way. It was very difficult to find, and it was a secret. But there was a rose in that garden, just like any other rose, only it was much bigger, and it had more leaves and a sweeter smell, and it was blue. And the fairy said if Johnny smelt it, he would get quite well. Then she and Johnny, in the story, went off together, and they had a great many adventures. They had met robbers and giants, and they lost their way in a wood, and all sorts of terrible things had happened. But she had taken such care of Johnny. She had protected him from the robbers. She had deluded the giants and sent them to sleep. And at last she and Johnny had come to the garden. Such a garden, full of lovely flowers. And right in the middle of the garden there was a blue rose, exactly the colour of the fairy's wings and hat. It was set round with thorns, but Kitty did not care one bit. She pushed her arm right through the thorns. It would get all scratched, but she did not mind. She would pluck the blue rose and give it to Johnny. He would smell it, and at the first whiff his leg would grow straight. He would smell it again, and his leg would grow strong. He would smell it a third time, and he would throw down his crutch. He would begin to jump about and dance. They would play games of hide and seek and run races, and Johnny would run faster than she could. They would come home together, and everybody would wonder, but they would not say a word about the blue rose. It was a secret. This story had been quite a little story when Kitty had first made it out of her own head. But Johnny had added bits to it. He had put in about the giants, and about a tiger with glaring green eyes going to spring upon him, just as they found the gate of the garden. The more she thought of all these things, the more Kitty felt she must see Johnny. Out went one barefoot from under the coverlid, and still, there in the moonlight, it seemed to be written, "Tomorrow is Christmas Day, and there may be no Johnny." This might be Johnny's last night. Kitty felt she would cry out if she were not allowed to see him. And out of bed went the other barefoot. The clock struck the half hour. It was 9:30. How silent the house was. Her mother was lying down. Nurse was with Johnny. If only she would come out of his room. She wished with all the might of her little heart Nurse would come out, but nothing stirred through the house. Yet after a while she heard a slight noise. A door was creaking below. It was Johnny's door. She heard a step. Out of bed dashed Kitty. She ran into the lobby. She looked over the banisters. Yes, it was Nurse going downstairs to the kitchen. She saw her white cap and apron quite distinctly. Kitty's heart seemed to stop beating. The kitchen door closed after Nurse. Hush!